Rain drummed on the parish hall roof as Lorraine's voice cut through dinner. "You're basically a maid here, Harlan. I'm Harlan Voss, 55, a retired controller, clutching my father's silver watch, its cool weight steadier than the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Ever been blindsided by family on a night you couldn't forget? It's funny how a single sentence dropped in the middle of a family dinner can feel heavier than the clatter of plates or the smell of charred ribs clinging to the air." Lorraine leaned back in her chair, her manicured fingers tapping the table like she was keeping time, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're basically a maid here, Harlan." The room went quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Caleb's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I didn't say a word. Instead, I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, fingers brushing over the cool surface of my father's silver pocket watch, and let the weight of it steady me. The smell of smoke from the backyard barbecue drifted through the open patio door, mingling with the faint chime of St. John's across the street. Lorraine's smile tightened as she reached down and pulled a small stack of envelopes from her purse. She tossed them across the table, the corners scattering like loose leaves landing right in front of me. "Since you've got time to kill," she said, her voice light but sharp, "maybe you can run these down to the utilities office tomorrow. I'm sure you'll find something to do between errands." The ink smudges on the overdue notices caught my eye, dark streaks like fingerprints, evidence of someone's carelessness before they were shoved my way. I gathered the envelopes slowly, taking my time, as if each fold into a neat pile was part of some private ritual. Across from me, Caleb cleared his throat, his gaze fixed firmly on his plate. He didn't meet my eyes. Not once. The silence stretched thick as the gravy cooling in the bowl between us, broken only by Lorraine's nails clicking against the wood. I could feel the faint tick of the watch through my palm, a rhythm my father had called a reminder that time outlasts pride. The words echoed in my head as I slid the folded bills into my jacket, careful not to wrinkle them. Lorraine watched me the way a cat watches a caged bird, waiting for a reaction she wasn't going to get. When I finally looked up, I met her gaze for just a moment long enough to see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes when I didn't take the bait. I nodded once, polite and cool, and rose from my chair to carry the dishes to the sink. The night air hit me as I stepped outside, the faint humidity of Charleston in spring mixing with the scent of charcoal still hanging in the yard. From across the street, the soft yellow glow of the church steps cut through the dark. Silas stood there, a shadow against the light, talking quietly to another parishioner. As I passed, his eyes met mine. Just a flicker, a subtle acknowledgement, and then he turned back to his conversation as if nothing had happened. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I caught it. Silas always saw more than he let on. I walked the long way home, past the iron gates of the churchyard, the lamplight pooling on the brick path beneath my shoes. A bulletin board stood by the steps, the paper notices rippling in the evening breeze. My eyes lingered on one autumn parish festival, October 14th. The date seemed to glow under the streetlight, a quiet marker on the horizon, a reminder that there's a time for everything, even reckonings. The pocket watch ticked softly in my hand as I moved on each beat, a quiet promise I didn't need to speak aloud. The soil was still warm beneath my fingers when I heard her voice cut through the cicada drone.
"A retired controller makes a good gardener, at least,"
Lorraine said from the shaded patio, her tone syrupy sweet for the friends seated around her. Their polite laughter drifted across the yard, mingling with the hum of insects and the faint rustle of magnolia leaves above me. I kept my hands in the dirt, pulling a stubborn root from the ground, pretending I didn't hear. The heat stuck to my back like a damp cloth, but I let the work anchor me, let the sounds of summer cover the sting in her words. The silver watch in my breast pocket caught a shaft of sunlight as I straightened up, flashing once, like it wanted to remind me there was more to me than mud and weeds. I brushed my palms on my jeans and glanced toward the patio. Lorraine tilted her sunglasses down just enough to meet my gaze, a little smirk curling her lips before she turned back to her audience. "He's got all the time in the world now," she quipped, swirling the ice in her glass.
Not much of a pension, but at least we get a free gardener out of it.
Her friends laughed again, softer this time, like even they knew she'd gone too far. Caleb sat at the edge of the group, hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the decking boards. He didn't speak, didn't correct her, just let the silence stretch until the laughter died down. His shoulders slumped, not enough for her to notice, but enough for me to see. I turned away before our eyes could meet, bent down, and dug the trowel back into the soil, the metal scraping quietly against a rock. Later, while hauling a bundle of old magazines from their garage to the recycling bin, I spotted a familiar envelope sticking out from a torn folder. A 401k statement, months old, its edges frayed, and the ink faded in places. It must have been tossed aside when Lorraine cleared space for her new decor. I smoothed the paper, gently tracing the numbers with a thumb. Those digits weren't large to her, but they were the kind of numbers that reminded me I wasn't nearly as powerless as she liked to think. Folding it carefully, I slipped it into my wallet, not as proof for her, but as a quiet reminder to myself. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the chorus of cicadas dimmed, replaced by the low, throaty croak of frogs from the neighbor's pond. I leaned against the fence, letting my mind drift back to a wooden porch years ago, my father sitting in his old rocker, the silver watch resting on his knee. Patient son, he'd said, his voice even as the night air cooled. Time and truth favor those who wait and plan. I'd been too young to appreciate it then, eager to prove myself in numbers and ledgers, but now with soil under my nails and Lorraine's laughter still ringing faintly in my ears, those words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The patio doors slid open behind me, and Lorraine's voice came again, sharper this time. "Harlan, be a dear and clean up out back. It looks like a mess. We're expecting company later." Her friends laughed outright this time, one of them murmuring something I couldn't catch. Caleb winced, rising slowly from his chair as if to intervene, but he stopped short when Lorraine glanced his way. I didn't say a word. I gathered the tools, brushed the dirt from my hands, and walked toward the shed without meeting anyone's eyes. Inside the dim shed, the scent of old wood and motor oil hung heavy. A lone bulb flickered overhead, casting weak light across the workbench. I pulled out the silver watch and held it in my palm, its face catching the last thin ray of sunlight through the open door. The second hand ticked steadily, a small, stubborn sound in the hush. "Not yet," I murmured, tracing the curve of its case with a fingertip. My voice was barely louder than the creak of the wooden rafters. But soon. The watch kept ticking unbothered, a reminder that patience wasn't weakness. It was preparation biding its time until everything lined up just right. I closed the shed door softly, leaving only the faint buzz of the bulb and the rhythmic hum of summer beyond the walls. The diner's wood-paneled walls held the scent of old oak, and something sweeter, the faint hint of waffles and maple syrup that lingered even when no one ordered them. A bell above the door jingled as Silas stepped inside, brushing a thin veil of winter chill from his coat. Without a word, he slid into the booth across from me, the vinyl seat sighing under his weight. In his weathered hands, he carried a porcelain coffee cup, not the diner's, but one of his own, its side marked by a delicate crack, the fracture repaired with a thin seam of gold resin that caught the light streaming through the window. He set it down gently, like it was a lesson as much as a cup. "You ever think about how some breaks make a thing more valuable?" he asked, voice low and steady as the waitress topped off our coffees. Steam rose from the dark liquid, curling lazily in the cool air between us. I watched it twist and fade, feeling the warmth seep into my chilled fingers as I wrapped them around the mug. Cracks don't always mean ruin. Sometimes they mean resilience, Silas added, his eyes lingering on me just long enough to make the point. I didn't answer right away. My gaze drifted past him to the frost-laced window where the soft chimes of St. John's carried faintly on the wind outside. The church was only a block away, its steeple half shrouded in the morning mist, a reminder of the town's patience with time. Lorraine didn't know patience. She liked results, the flashy kind, and thought I'd become another silent fixture in the background of her life. Silas stirred his coffee slowly, the spoon tapping the ceramic twice before he set it aside. "She's been pushing hard," he said. "Wants the trust to sell off that parcel by the marsh. Thinks you're just along for the ride." She has no idea. From beneath his coat, Silas pulled out a thick manila folder and set it on the table between us. The cover bore a clear label, typed in sharp black ink, voting records. Harlan Voss, majority stakeholder. The folder's weight landed with a quiet finality, a soft thud muffled by the table's worn laminate. My hand hovered over it for a moment before I rested my palm on the cool, smooth surface. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried not just paper, but proof of leverage Lorraine couldn't imagine I had. Silas leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly as he studied my expression.
"She thinks you've got nothing left but free time and calloused hands," he said. "She's banking on it. Literally. If she knew what's in there, she'd think twice before calling you her gardener."
A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not unkind, but edged with a certain satisfaction. The golden seam on his cup glinted as a ray of winter sunlight found it casting a thin line of brilliance across the tabletop. For a moment, the fractured cup seemed like a reflection of my own position marked tested, but intact, and perhaps worth more because of it. I flipped open the folder. The pages were crisp, meticulously organized, each line of numbers and signatures underscoring the truth of my position. There it was, in bold type, near the top of the page, voting authority Harlan Voss. 52%. I pressed my thumb lightly against my name, feeling the texture of the paper beneath the pad of my finger, as if grounding myself in the reality of it. A quiet jolt of resolve sparked through me, not a surge, but a slow, steady current that spread through my chest and settled somewhere deep. For a while, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the diner filled the silence. Instead, the sizzle of bacon from the kitchen, the soft shuffle of feet on tile, the occasional murmur of a patron at the counter. Outside, a gull cried overhead, swooping low near the marsh, where the trust's land stretched untouched. Silas took another sip from his cup, his fingers tracing the golden seam like a habit, as if it reminded him of something personal. Finally, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Patience has a price, Harlan," he murmured, voice low enough that it was nearly lost under the clatter of dishes behind the counter. His eyes locked on mine, calm but unwavering.
Are you ready to collect?
The steam from my coffee had thinned to wisps by then, the surface rippling slightly as a draft slipped through the door when another customer came in. I glanced once more at the bold letters on the page, then back to Silas. My fingers closed over the edge of the folder, not pulling it closer, not pushing it away, just holding it. The golden crack in his cup caught the light again brighter this time, as if to echo his question. And, though I didn't answer out loud, I felt the steady tick of my father's watch in my pocket, each beat nudging me closer to the decision I already knew was coming. The attic was dim, the kind of light that makes every floating speck of dust visible, spinning slowly in the shafts of late afternoon sun that cut through a cracked window. The wooden beams above groaned faintly, with each gust outside a low creak, like the house itself was eavesdropping. Lorraine's heels clicked sharply on the old boards as she pawed through boxes, her manicured fingers pulling out envelopes and tossing them into piles like she was sifting for gold. When she came across the pocket watch, my father's silver watch polished smooth by years of his hands and mine, she held it up between two fingers. It slipped, hit the hardwood with a clang, and the hinge gave way with a sharp snap that echoed off the rafters. She didn't flinch. "Scrap metal," she said with a little laugh, not even glancing my way. "Surprised you didn't pawn it already." I crouched down slowly, the boards cool beneath my knees, and picked up the watch. The hinge sagged, the lid hanging loose like a broken jaw. The steady tick inside faltered, but didn't stop each uneven beat louder in my ears than Lorraine's laughter as she moved on to another box. I traced the dented case with my thumb, feeling a chill creep into my chest. Not anger exactly, but something colder, more focused. Behind me, Lorraine kept talking her words a careless stream. "Most of this is junk anyway. Old statements, old memories." "You really hold on to things, don't you, Harlan? Not sure it's healthy living in the past." An envelope tore under her hand as she flicked through a stack. A small, neat rip revealed bold lettering dividend statement, my name printed in crisp type on the front. She wrinkled her nose and tossed it aside, the paper landing near my boot. I slid it toward me with the side of my shoe, folded it carefully despite the tear, and slipped it into my jacket alongside the battered watch. Each motion felt deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if I were stacking kindling for a fire I knew I'd light soon enough. The attic air tasted of dust and old pine, the scent of forgotten decades. I could hear Caleb's footsteps on the stairs below, a pause halfway up, like he wasn't sure if he should intervene. He didn't. He never did when Lorraine was like this. And maybe that stung more than her words. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the faint hum of cicadas outside and the distant thrum of traffic settle around me. Then, cutting through it all, came the slow, deliberate toll of the church bells from St. John's. Evening prayer. The sound rolled through the attic beams, a low reminder that time, no matter how battered, keeps moving forward. Lorraine turned back toward me, a stack of brittle papers in her arms, still smirking. "Really, Harlan? What do you even do with yourself anymore?" "Collect scraps and memories." "Someone should tell you that value isn't found in the past." Her words hung in the stale air, brittle as the papers she carried. I met her gaze evenly, my voice level when I finally spoke. "Even broken things can hold more value than you realize." I didn't raise my tone. I didn't need to. The words seemed to hang there, longer than hers, heavier somehow, as if the creaking beams themselves carried them down the stairs. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a faint vibration I could feel even over the sound of the bells. I slipped it out and glanced at the screen. A message from Silas Parish Board and Family Council, 2 weeks. Be ready. My thumb hovered over the reply for a moment as I looked back at the watch, still ticking, despite the cracked hinge. I closed the attic door softly behind me, the latch catching with a quiet click. Lorraine's voice faded behind the wood as I typed my response and slid the phone back into my pocket. I'll be there, I whispered to myself, as much as to Silas. It's time. The air in the hallway felt cooler, cleaner than the attic's stagnant haze. I could still hear the church bells as I made my way down the stairs, each note measured steady. The watch in my pocket ticked along with them, imperfect but unbroken, like it knew its moment. Our moment was finally drawing near. The boardroom smelled faintly of beeswax and the lingering musk of old hymnals, the kind of scent that clings to wooden walls that have absorbed decades of whispered prayers and heated debates. Rain tapped softly against the stained glass windows, its rhythm broken now and then by the groan of the building settling. I sat near the end of the long oak table, leather folio resting closed in front of me as Lorraine commanded the room with the ease of someone certain she owned it. Her voice was smooth, polished, rising above the low murmurs of the parish board elders like a practiced orator. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, she said, gesturing toward a glossy brochure she had slid to each board member. The pages showed digital renderings of sleek condominiums, where marshland now sat complete with smiling families strolling along a boardwalk that didn't exist. We can ensure the parish thrives for decades. New development partners, fresh revenue streams. It's time we stop clinging to outdated holdings. Her smile was radiant, the sort meant to assure people they were in capable hands. I watched her nails tap lightly against the brochure as she paused for effect. Silas, seated 2 chairs down, caught my eye. His expression was as neutral as the hymns etched into the stained glass behind him, but his hand moved almost imperceptibly, tapping the edge of the printed agenda where in bold type my voting rights were listed. A quiet reminder that my silence wasn't weakness, it was timing. I drew in a slow breath, letting the faint scent of beeswax and rain anchor me, and flipped open my folio without a sound. Lorraine was still talking, listing projected profits, citing vague, interested parties, with a confidence that filled the air like incense. The board elders shifted in their seats, some nodding absently, others frowning at the figures she rattled off. I waited until her voice reached its practiced crescendo, until she spread her arms slightly, as if to embrace the inevitability of her vision, before I slid a crisp stack of certified papers across the table. The motion was deliberate, slow enough to draw attention without theatrics. The room fell silent as the documents came to rest between the polished wood and the glossy brochure. Before we consider any vote, I said evenly, my voice just loud enough to rise above the rain, there's the matter of the trust bylaws. I tapped a line highlighted in blue, the ink smudging slightly beneath my thumb. Section 4 states any liquidation of trust property requires not only a board majority, but the signature of the majority stakeholder. I looked up, meeting the eyes of each elder before landing on Lorraine last. That would be me. Her smirk wavered, the confident tilt of her chin faltering as she glanced down at the papers. Her fingers tightened around her pen, the knuckles whitening as the rain's hum seemed to grow louder in the quiet. One of the elders cleared his throat softly, the sound startling in the stillness. Lorraine tried to recover, leaning forward to glance at the documents, but her smile no longer reached her eyes. I leaned back slightly, giving the board time to absorb what the papers meant, the authority behind the signature line bearing my name. The marshland stays as it is, I said, after a moment, voice measured. This trust was built to preserve, not to chase quick returns. And as the bylaws stand, that mission isn't changing without me. The silence stretched long enough for the rain to fill the room again, a soft percussion against the windows that felt louder than Lorraine's muted inhale. I gathered my papers slowly, tucking them back into the folio, and rose from my chair with unhurried movements. My eyes met hers across the table, holding her gaze just long enough to let the weight of what had transpired settle between us. "This land isn't going anywhere," I said, my tone calm, deliberate. I snapped the folio closed with a soft click and slipped it under my arm. But that's only the start. The words lingered as I stepped away from the table, the muted shuffle of my shoes against the hardwood, and the steady beat of the rain filling the space Lorraine had once dominated. She sat rigid in her chair, the pen still clenched in her hand, her brochures untouched as the elders exchanged quiet glances, their focus no longer on her gleaming proposals, but on the door I had just passed through. Outside, the parish bells began to toll their sound, rolling over the rain, like a signal that the boardroom and Lorraine's careful balance of control had shifted. The living room felt colder than the January air, drifting in through the seams of the old windows, though the fire in the hearth cracked and popped like it was working overtime to chase away the chill. Shadows stretched long across the hardwood floor, flickering with each shift of the flames. Caleb stood near the mantel, hands tucked into his pockets, his brow furrowed in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy, trying to make sense of things bigger than himself. "Dad, why didn't you say anything sooner?" His voice was low, almost careful, like he wasn't sure whether he wanted the answer. On the coffee table between us, my father's silver pocket watch rested, hinge cracked but ticking on each faint beat, cutting through Lorraine's restless pacing. She moved from window to window, arms crossed her heels, tapping a clipped rhythm against the floor. The sound of the watch, steady and imperfect, seemed to grow louder with every pass she made, a counterpoint to her agitation. I sat back in Caleb's worn armchair, its leather creaking under my weight, and folded my hands over a stack of papers in my lap. I let the question hang for a moment before answering the fire's soft roar, filling the silence. "Because timing matters," I said finally. My voice carried the even tone I'd spent a lifetime honing in boardrooms and audits, a tone that never needed to rise to hold weight. And because some truths don't stick unless the moment forces people to hear them. I lifted the papers, fanning them slightly, so the light from the fire caught the official seals and signatures. Dividend statements, share certificates, records Lorraine had once torn or tossed aside without a glance. Now they sat like small verdicts in my hands. Caleb stepped closer, his eyes scanning the top page. The reflection of the firelight danced across his face as he read the figures, the company name, bold in the header, the same company Lorraine had paraded at dinner parties, boasting of her ties as if she were its backbone.
"You own the controlling shares?"
he asked. Not disbelief so much as recalibration, his mind piecing together the months and years of quiet I had kept. "Yes," I said, sliding the top sheet toward him. The brittle edge of one statement torn when Lorraine had ripped open the envelope months ago caught against my thumb as I passed it. And I've held them for longer than most of the people she entertains have been at that company. I never flaunted it because I never needed to, until now. Lorraine finally stopped pacing her silhouette, framed by the window, where cold streetlight spilled through. Her voice came sharp at first, a reflexive lash. "So, you've just been sitting back, letting everyone think—" She stopped herself, drawing in a breath, her tone softening for the first time since I could remember. "You let me look like a fool." Caleb turned to her, his voice calm, but edged with something firmer than I'd heard before.
No, Lorraine. You did that on your own.
His gaze didn't waver as he stepped between us, the firelight casting his shadow long and dark on the wall.
You talked down to him. You tried to sell off the trust land without understanding who you were dealing with. And now...
He glanced toward me, his jaw set.
Now you work with Dad. Or not at all.
The room held its breath. The only sounds were the soft tick of the watch on the table and the pop of sap in the fire. Lorraine's shoulders lowered as the reality settled the air of control she carried, peeling away piece by piece. She looked at Caleb, then at me, her lips pressing together without forming words. She turned slowly, crossing the room with measured steps. The door gave a quiet click as it closed behind her, the sound sharper than her heels had been against the floor. Caleb stayed by the mantel eyes on the flames as they shifted and sighed. I reached for the pocket watch, feeling its cool surface against my palm, the uneven tick steady beneath my fingers. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The room, stripped of her pacing, seemed to breathe easier. The firelight painted the torn edge of the dividend statement in gold, the same gold that glinted faintly on the cracked hinge of the watch. Outside, the winter wind whispered against the eaves, but inside all that mattered was the quiet, the kind that comes after a storm, when the ground finally stops shaking, and you can hear the clock again. The parish hall still smelled faintly of fresh paint, a clean, sharp scent layered over the softer aroma of brewed coffee drifting from the cafe corner. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, turning the specks of dust in the air into drifting flecks of gold. Silas settled into the chair across from me, his movements unhurried as always, and set down a familiar object between us, a porcelain coffee cup, its fine crack sealed with a seam of gold that caught the morning light. The line gleamed as if to punctuate his words. "Victory's easy, Harlan," he said, curling his fingers around his own mug. "Building something lasting, that's harder." His voice was calm but firm, carrying the kind of weight only earned by years of seeing people win battles only to lose themselves afterward. The steam rising from my cup curled lazily upward, mingling with the faint drafts sneaking through the annex doors, and for a moment the entire space seemed to pause with his words. Outside, beyond the open double doors, a newly painted wooden sign swayed in the soft Charleston breeze. The black letters were still crisp: Voss Community and Scholarship Fund, opening soon. The sign creaked gently on its hinges, the sound subtle but constant, like a reminder that all this, the trust, the shares, the leverage I'd wielded so carefully, had to mean something more than settling a score. I traced the rim of my cup with a fingertip, watching the steam coil away, and let Silas's words sink in. Caleb stood near the counter, speaking quietly with one of the parish staff before walking over, his expression somewhere between cautious optimism and quiet pride. "Dad," he said, leaning against the table, "we can do this together. The projects, the scholarships, the outreach. I know you don't need the help, but maybe it's time to show people the Voss name means more than boardrooms and grudges." His eyes met mine, steady. No hint of pity, just a bridge being built, plank by plank. Silas leaned back slightly, a faint smile tugging at his beard. "You've spent years holding the line," he said. "Now you have a chance to build something that outlives both of you. Lorraine included." The name landed softly, without judgment, but the weight of it lingered. Caleb glanced at me, then added, "She should be part of it. Not to punish her, not to let her run it either, but Maybe she needs to see what real stewardship looks like. I took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through me, as my eyes drifted again to the golden seam on Silas's cup. It glinted when he tilted it slightly, the line of repair, as bright as the paint still drying on the annex walls. My thumb found its way to the cracked hinge of my father's watch in my pocket, the cool metal, a contrast to the ceramic warmth of the cup. The hinge had held despite everything, much like I had. The decision settled in me as easily as the coffee's heat. This wasn't about Lorraine anymore, or even about reclaiming my dignity. It was about turning what I held, Cher's land trust time, into something that mattered for more than just my own satisfaction. The kind of legacy my father might have imagined when he pressed that watch into my hand years ago, telling me time, if nothing else, should be used wisely. Silas lifted his cup, turning it just so the gold seam caught the sun. "Shall we turn cracks into gold, then?" His eyes held mine steady and unblinking, as the faint creak of the sign outside seemed to punctuate the moment. I reached for my own mug, clinking it softly against his, the faint ring echoing through the quiet hall. Caleb watched us, a faint smile crossing his face, as the steam curled between us like a bridge thin but steady. The breeze from outside stirred the sign again, the sound soft but certain, like a clock ticking, not to mark time passing, but to mark something beginning. And for the first time in years, I felt the tick of my watch as something other than a countdown. It felt like a starting gun. Candlelight flickered along the polished wood beams of the parish hall, soft and golden, casting long shadows that swayed gently with every shift of the gathered crowd. The scent of lavender and freshly buffed beeswax filled the space, grounding it in warmth and ceremony. Near the entrance, in a simple glass case lit by a narrow beam from above, my father's silver pocket watch gleamed whole once more. Its face shone with the kind of quiet dignity only something weathered and restored could hold. The applause of neighbors and parishioners swelled behind me, a tide of approval I hadn't sought but accepted now, not for myself alone, but for what this night meant. Lorraine stood to my right, Caleb to my left. Her hands were clasped, her shoulders no longer stiff with defiance, but eased into something closer to composure. She wasn't here as a defeated rival, but as a partner finally understanding what stewardship, not control, could look like. Caleb's posture carried quiet pride, his eyes sweeping the hall. Landing briefly on the sign for the new fund behind us, Voss Community and Scholarship Fund, dedicated to lasting growth. The letters glimmered faintly under the candlelight, a promise inked not just on wood, but in the structure of our family, however imperfectly mended. I stepped forward as the murmur of voices settled into a hush. Thank you all. I began, my voice steady, filling the hall without strain. Tonight isn't about me, or even about my family alone. It's about what patience can build, what humility can preserve, and how legacy. Real legacy isn't something we clutch for ourselves, but something we hand forward. My words flowed unhurried, anchored by the calm rhythm of the piano playing softly in the corner, a hymn rising and falling like the breath of the hall itself. Faces in the crowd tilted upward, some familiar from years of pews and parish dinners, others younger, hopeful. Lorraine and I stood together at the ribbon scissors poised. Caleb placed a hand briefly on my shoulder, the contact light but grounding as if to say without words that this was the right place to land after the turbulence. The ribbon gave way with a clean, satisfying snip, the strands curling softly to the floor. The applause rose again, gentle but genuine, echoing beneath the timbered ceiling. It didn't feel like a coronation or a final victory lap. It felt like a door opening, one we were all meant to walk through together. After the ribbon fell, I walked to the glass case. The watch inside ticked faintly, its repaired hinge smooth, the small imperfection in its casing, catching the light in a way that made it seem almost alive. I knelt slightly, letting my fingertips rest on the cool glass. The hum of conversation behind me softened as the piano shifted to a slower refrain, the notes pooling in the air like ripples across a still pond. Caleb leaned close, his voice a whisper meant only for me. "Dad, this feels right." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the watch, watching the tiny hand sweep over its face with patient precision. My breath fogged the glass just enough to blur the reflection of my own face, leaving only the gleam of the watch clear and sharp. Somewhere, not in sound, but in memory, I could hear my father's voice, as steady as the mechanism inside that case. "Time proves worth, son. Always." The lavender in the air lingered, mingling with the faint scent of beeswax as the candles guttered slightly in a passing draft. I didn't turn when the parish bells began their measured toll outside, calling the town to the moment. My hand stayed on the glass, feeling its cool certainty beneath my palm, as the piano's hymn resolved into its final chord. The hall, the fund, the watch, the family, all of it felt at last aligned. Not perfect, but aligned. And for the first time in years, as the watch's faint tick blended with the bell's chime, I felt time not as a wait or a countdown, but as something finally fully ours. As the candles dimmed and the lavender scent lingered in the air, I watched the silver watch, now whole again, catch the soft glow from the hall's windows. Its steady tick felt less like a clock counting time and more like a quiet reminder of what endures when pride and grudges fade. I've learned that justice doesn't have to end in bitterness, and that rebuilding, while harder than winning, carries a deeper peace. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can see which ones deserve to be rebuilt. If you've ever been through a season where life handed you a second chance in disguise, what did it teach you? Share your thoughts below. I'd like to hear your story.